If you roll out Copilot in your organization, you will get return and you'll get continued return on investment. I promise. Like, this is without adoption investments. Like, you will drive benefits. However, what happens is adoption, which is a much lower cost, it costs a lot less money than licensing. It drives tremendous gains and benefit. Let's talk about pilot plans, measurement. So the first thing I want to talk about is we've all heard technology, people, processes. I've just changed this ever so slightly with data, because when we talk about AI, the advantage to AI that you get is around your data, right? Your organization has different data than a competitor in the same space, and that is an advantage. You can use AI in very clever ways with that. Your processes, which by the way I think is a people-oriented thing, your processes that we matter here are the lowercase p processes. So I know there's a temptation to think of processes as the capital P processes. That's what's in like customer experience systems. That's what's in ERP systems. That's what's in finance and specific systems, HR systems. That's great. Like, those are capital P processes. The thing is, all of those systems are getting AI enrichment. So if you use Microsoft, Dynamics is having all these other copilots and experiences. So you're going to every boat. Everyone who uses those systems is going to be uplifted. So I don't see it as a competitive advantage. I just see it as a competitive disadvantage if you're not using modern tool sets, right? Ones that are AI enriched. So that's an important distinction. So what I focus on is lowercase p processes, and that's human to human. That's people in your organization, because all the lowercase p processes is what happens between this customer experience system and it's the documents. It's all that Copilot stuff. So even if you have lots of people who have license for Copilot for sales in your sales group, those same people should also have Copilot for Microsoft 365, because there's a lot of stuff that they'll do that goes back to like building the proposal or doing other documents where the templates and the automated scenarios don't quite meet their needs and they need to tune it further. So again, just a long-winded way of saying processes are about lowercase p and people matter. And then adoption, which you guys all get. So let's talk then about this from a numbers perspective. If you roll out, this is around a 300-person, composite organization. If you roll out Copilot in your organization, you will get return and you'll get continued return on investment. I promise. Like, this is without adoption investments. Like, you will drive benefit. So I've never seen a customer license a bunch of Copilot and not keep a bunch of those licenses and feel good about it, even if they didn't do some of those other investments the right way. However, what happens is adoption, which is a much lower cost, it costs a lot less money than licensing. It drives tremendous gains and benefit. And it does take time to get there. Remember, you're building the muscles, you're building that service model internally, you're building the content that's going to resonate with people, you're building those journeys, those flows, the champion networks. That takes time, but we think long-term it may even be exponential. It's certainly strongly supported that it's going to keep rising, whereas the baseline capabilities, while they're great, aren't really going to, because they have new licensing, new pricing, they're not really ever going to surpass that return on investment in the same way. At the same time, we know that data and optimization of data matters. So, cleaning your data, reducing redundancy, all those things. The funny thing is we found on its own, it's interesting. There's a little bit of return on investment, but honestly, it's not been that compelling if we're just being transparent and really looking at the data. However, you need this to get this. So what we found is the real purpose of the data optimization should align as soon as possible with how do we change the process, lowercase p process especially, of how people work. And so then this is what we think is the exponential curve. As much as I love adoption, and obviously I've talked about the importance of business readiness there, it's actually when you start to get into plugins and when you start to get into use cases of how people are using it, thinking of qualitative outcomes, is when we really see much, much more substantial return on investment. And the thing is normally this starts after 6 months, or it starts later in the process, because you don't immediately invest in process stuff. Of course you experiment with plugins, you can see that happening here, but we don't scale that until we get further along, and that's really important. So based on what we're seeing already, we think this is an exponential curve because, again, Copilot hasn't been out that long, but we're already seeing this metric. And check back in at the end of the year, because I really do think this is going to be more and more hockey stick oriented. And when we get functional agents on top of it, it'll be even more substantial in that way. And that's how you keep up with the exponential curve from return on investment. All right, so that's the important overlays for measurement. And again, I've got some numbers here and some considerations. But again, it's like if you're trying to convince an executive body or leaders, to invest in things like adoption or invest in plugins and setting up some of these programmatic motions, this hopefully will help you. The second thing I wanted to do is I want to talk about the shared implementation plan model. So in the technical readiness, I talked about this a fair amount. It's really important to come up with those scenarios, have those shared with IT. You're all working, IT's answering questions like these ones, like do we have security considerations, licensing we need, et cetera. And in the IT and technical readiness, I talked a lot about security, but this is owned by both parties. So it's really important that the business understands that they are responsible. All that SharePoint information architecture, all that stuff we've heard about for years, that's still just as relevant. In fact, it generates more value on the Copilot data because then it knows what it's looking at. There's less people using the wrong assets and information. Think of it like a search experience that's a little bit more clever. It still has some of those risks that search has. So redundant, outdated, trivial content or rot is still an issue. And then access reviews need to be mutually owned. It can't just be, of course, IT can trigger them and should do that and be proactive there, but the business needs to take ownership for making sure that the right people have access and the wrong people don't have access. And this kind of looks like a timeline. Generally, this is around 12 weeks. So we see around a 3-month time period to roll it out. Lots of different activities. I've talked about most of these things. Lots of different things that you're doing during the sequencing of those 12 weeks with the eventual goal of, scale piloting near the end of it. And so that's kind of the sequencing you go through. That doesn't mean you can't give people licensing right at the beginning. In fact, I think you should give, like I said, a cohort of IT and other people access to licensing right away because they need to learn. And the way you learn Copilot is you start with your individual. You learn it as an individual, then you learn it as a team, then you learn it as a department, then you learn it as an org. So, you can't just jump to learning it as a department, as IT. You need to make sure individually, you at least as a leader who are championing that, have understood how it works. So that's an important distinction in the flow.